Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Pika Cebu.
Good evening.
Tonight, I'm very privileged. Yes, I'm privileged to share with you whatever insights and lessons and trainings I've learned on how to craft or how to write your story. Let's have a refresher course from last meeting's seminar workshop on choose your story and why do you want, why are you writing that story? Could you have the slide later, please? Let's have a refresher course first. So we said that we choose our story from the events of far and wide because the story where we are happens. I was reminded of an incident in a social function in a military gathering, and someone said, "Where is the presidential table?" And the other answered, "Where I am." Where do we get our stories? Where we are, that is where our story begins. Remember that famous line, "Where do I begin?" To tell you about a love story. So it begins from where we are. And then the next thing is, how do you put value in your story? By finding your why. So finding your why. Why am I writing this story? Why do I want to share it with the world? And the inspiring stories coming across now that's all over the internet is the story of Jane or Nightbird, who's overcoming her pain and suffering in the final stages of her battle with cancer. And so she said, what did she say? Her message to the world that I do not want to be remembered for all the bad things that's happening to me. I do not want to be remembered for all the sufferings, but I want to be remembered that with joy and faith and courage, I was able to overcome my suffering. So that's where the essence and the beauty of every human story is. You are your own story. Why? We say our lives is a book, and we are the author of our lives, our stories. So if you make it a bestseller, you might as well something that would really be like your legacy. So that's why you find your why. You want to inspire, you want to motivate, you want to share an experience. You want to tell the world that my story matters, your story matters, and that we are here to share each other's story. Now let's go now to the portion for today's workshop. Show me a story, don't tell me one. Now, how to tell your story? How do we tell it? Before we always say that, tell us a story. But now it's not a matter of narrating events. It's not actually developing a plot. For example, boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl, the love is forbidden, boy resolves the conflict, and then they live happily ever after. Very simple plot. But now the story has become a narrative. That means between the scenes would be a string of events that you have to sew together and form a really seamless or a fluid story. So how do you tell your story? How to tell your story? One, Filipinos particularly, or readers or listeners in general, are very visual. They want to see the image, no, the image behind your words. So we become sensual. When we say sensual, we engage our senses. So first we have our sense of sight. Our listeners or our readers, particularly this one is how to transport your story into a speech. So we said that there are words that are better read, but there are words that have to be delivered. So now we're referring to the speech form. So we use the senses. because that is the first base where our listeners would touch base with us, the senses. So the sense of sight. Why the sense of sight? They must be able to see the image behind every word. We say that every word has a story. That story must provide an image by seeing. They have to say it, no? So sense of sight. That's why it's very difficult to use abstract words. You turn off, or listeners would fall somewhere else. So you have to be very present in the mind and in the consciousness of your listeners by engaging the senses. So sense of sight. They must see the image behind every word. You see, they say images do not just happen. You have to create the image. So for example, in that very particular scene of um that revolu wait um Oliver in well, never mind. In that particular scene of, for example, you have I forgot the name of that queen, but there was uprising in France during the Civil Revolution, and people were hungry, and then she said that, well, give them cake to eat. That's an irony because they don't even have bread. How can they eat cake? So the image has to be visual. Give them cake to eat, but they cry for bread. It's one more day. The people are hungry. So the image is very vivid. People are hungry. People are fighting over a piece of bread. So in that way, you're able to engage the sense of sight. So next to the sense of sight would be people see your image. You have to describe the image. We now have the sense of hearing. We have the next slide, please. The sense of hearing. Okay, the sense. Okay, let's go to the sense of smell. How does sense of smell come into your story? How does sense of smell come into your speech? Well, perhaps maybe you have to go and imagine the aroma of freshly brewed into a speech. And perhaps you'd say, coffee is life. Every morning when I get up, I smell that freshly brewed coffee, and it's enough to make my day. So you can incorporate that story now of waking up to the fresh aroma of brewed coffee, and you wake up with all the energy and enthusiasm, then it makes your day. So in a speech, in a story form. And sense of smell is important also because, for example, uh, in a city where there was so much destruction because of the calamity, the smell of death was everywhere. The smell of destruction was everywhere. So you could just imagine the sense of smell, right? And then the next um, sense that we need to also engage in would be the sense of taste. Now we say, how does life taste? Or do you ever get to smell, to taste life? Life can be sweet, life can be bitter. Or what about your experience? It was a bitter sweet experience. But these are metaphorical, but still they appeal to the senses. When when a difficult experience is like a bitter pill to swallow. So a painful, humiliating experience is like a bitter pill to swallow. So there, the sense of taste is metaphorical. Then the next sense would be the sense of, I think, touch, hearing. Okay, this one so beautiful. No, hearing. Can people hear your speech? Yes. Okay, as a speaker, are they listening to your story? Yes. Remember, there is a difference between you can hear me, but you're not listening. So people can hear your speech, no, the sound waves, they can hear the words, but are they listening? So listening is in a higher form. That means your words must really capture the essence their attention. See, listening, and it's the bells. The bells. You listen to the bells. You hear the bells. They're there. But do you listen? Yes. When you stop, right? During the mass, the bells symbolize every part. I remember when I was growing up in Baguio, 6 o'clock in the evening was a very solemn time. And though local tourists and vacationers who would go up to Baguio are all advised to please join the people of Baguio to stop for a moment at 6 o'clock. You don't have to pray the Angelus, but you can just bow your head, and you could see all traffic would stop, people would stop. If you are in the middle of the pedestrian lane, you can stop. And it was a beautiful sight, no? You can hear the Angelus and the peep. There is silence everywhere. So that's listening, no? It's not only hearing. We hear the bells of the Angelus, but when we stop and meditate and pray, then we are listening to the Angelus. So these are the five senses. Are we done with all the five senses? Hearing, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, the sense, incorporate that in your story, the sense of touch, okay? The sense of touch is also very valuable. Why? Did your message touch the heart of your audience? Did your speech touch something in them that triggered a call to action? Did your words powerfully evoke an emotion that inspire them to do something about their present condition? So touch there does not necessarily mean only the sense of touching, but touch the heart. See, the elements of a great speech is you trigger the brain, you touch the heart also, and then you rally for action. So, but first you must touch the minds and the heart before you could produce the action. So these are the senses that appeal to the audience whenever you deliver speech. Now you cannot incorporate all five senses in your speech. Maybe two or three can be present in this sentence. Tell me how many senses did this example produce? Example, I would read. As the old frail monk peered through the gathering darkness, to he began to yeah he began to shiver as the cold evening breeze began to blow. He hastened his steps as the Angelus bells rang from the distance. So as the old frail monk peered through the gathering darkness, he began to shiver as the cold evening breeze blew, and he hastened his steps as he began to hear the Angelus from the distance. So how many words touch the senses? Anyone? Or you can just answer without even raising your hands. What sense is peered as he peered through the darkness? You can unmute yourselves. Hello? Can you hear me?
The senses?
How many in the words or in the verse that were said, how many of the senses were touched, or how many of the senses were mentioned? Okay, what sense? How many? Or can just say a word. Peered is sense of sight, right? As he peered through the gathering darkness, it's seeing. What about shiver?
Sense of touch.
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 Shiver is feeling. You shiver because it's cold. It's not touch. Shiver. Okay. Now, hastened. Hasten his steps.
Hearing.
Seeing. Hasten. He was in a hurry, right? Heard the Angelus from the distance. Heard the Angelus from the distance is?
Sense of hearing.
Yes. Okay. So how many Okay, first peered through the gathering darkness and of sight. He shivered. There's a sense of feeling. No, he feels cold. And then he began to hasten his steps. So you see him walking faster, that is sight. And then he began to hear the Angelus bells, hearing. Now, of course, this visual, very visual, because then you can see, you can touch, not really touch, but you can hear and feel. See, when your sentences or when you use words that appeal to the senses, there is an instant connectivity. People immediately would respond to you. That's why images are created by the use of the senses. So, for example, the scent of newly cut grass filled the fields, and he knew that he was home. Have you ever smelled the scent of newly cut grass? Because there's a very distinct smell. So that is smell. When you use words that appeal the senses, they immediately have an instant connection with the imagination. So imagination, right, when you go on a road trip and you pass through these free fields of rice fields, and you see the green or the golden stalks about to ripen, these are very visual sights. See, and then when they're freshly cut, you can also smell them. So these are, if you use those images in your speech, they immediately trigger something in the mind or imagination. It could bring, for example, the feeling of homesickness as you remember your childhood days in the farm. It could also evoke something very sentimental as a homecoming. So your words in your speech must be able to touch the heart and touch the mind to make you present in your audience. And then, aside from the senses, what do you incorporate to make your speech even vibrant? What technique can you still use to make your speech alive and relevant? So aside from engaging the senses, we now go to the use of verbs. Okay, verbs, less adjectives. Why? Because verbs are action words. Like if you use more verbs in your speech, the words jump out of the pages, they leap. See, for example, jump, walk, savor, dance, imagine, climb, meditate, inhale, run. Verbs are action words. And when you use action words in your speech, they make the people also, react. For example, in your when you deliver a speech now and you say fellow toastmasters and friends, would you rather that we continue being passive, we continue being indifferent, or would you rather we get to move fast, that we, if we want to make changes, then we do it ourselves? So if you want to save our seas, then let us use our spare time to come together and clean our seas. See, there is action there, and people see it. Or, for example, when you say in your speech now that I remember this speech very well, and it was full of action, but the actions were emotional. And it was an icebreaker. One of the most beautiful speeches, or the most beautiful speeches in a Toastmasters journey, is always the icebreaker, because it is honest and authentic and sincere. You pair your heart and soul to a complete group of strangers. And the words were very revealing. And she said, I could not forget this speech because I was the evaluator. She said, I was an unwanted child. See, I felt I was not loved as a child. I was an outcast. My brothers and sisters would not include me in their games. My parents could not even attend school functions that I would be honored like They didn't care whether they would pin a medal, hang a medal, or pin a ribbon on me. As a child growing up, I began that the world was not a safe and friendly place to grow up in. See, those were words that really made you feel, no, I was unwanted as a child. They did not include me in their games. They could not care. They didn't attend school functions. They didn't pin my ribbons. They didn't hang my medals. See, and you were able to picture a young child or a young student waiting for the parent as her name is called, and then the poor child or the poor student goes to the teacher, the advisor. So the advisor hangs the medal or paints the ribbon. I mean, for all of us who have gone through school celebrations, we know very well that it is a moment of glory for the student, and not to have parents coming in, it was really a disaster. So those words are very simple, but they appeal to the heart. And you can imagine her name being called, and nobody would come up and meet her halfway to be able to pin the ribbon or the medal. So these are vivid images, or the use of verbs. For example, in a burning building, firemen clambered up their ladders, and there the people screaming and wanting to get out as the fires engulf the burning building. So it's pure action words. The fires engulfing, the fire spreading, and firemen climbing up the wall, and people screaming. So again, you see it very vivid, just like in the movies. Verbs, no? Look, which appealed, rather than the fire was at its height, and the flames were bright orange, and it seemed like no one could escape death when you would be trapped in this kind of fire. See, it's flat, and it cannot even evoke or a reaction. So the difference now is use adjectives sparingly, or are they necessary, but use verbs more because they put life into your language. They put life into your speech. That's why it is call to action is more popular rather than an appeal to the emotion. A call to action is fellow Toastmasters and friends. We want a better world for our children. We begin making the world better now. The future begins now. So the action there is the future begins now. We take the future today is very vivid rather than we want a world where our children would be able to live freely. How is that possible? We want a world where our children would be able to be educated. So how is that possible? We want a world where our children can be educated in schools. We offer more scholarships. We ran a program that would include all children to be in school. No one should be left out. So these are action words that make your message tangible. They see at once the act of building, the act of including, rather than every child has the right to be educated. Fine. But how is a child to be educated? Bring the child to the classroom. See, it's more concrete than the child has the right to be educated. Bring every child to the classroom. Or you say that every child deserves a birthday. How do you make that concrete? That means that every life is sacred, so we go to protect lives of the unborn. So it's more, we protect the lives of children rather than every child deserves a birthday. So this one is, we ensure to protect the lives of children. So there is protection rather than celebrating. So when you use verbs, be sure that the verbs would bring enough action, or the verbs are appropriate to your message. So after the use of verbs, of course, you can always use adjectives, but use them sparingly. because adjectives would tend to drag the sentence. Too much adjectives would tend to what? Remove the focus on the main subject, and they would tend to slow down the action. They would tend to drag the meaning of the sentence. Maybe one or two adjectives would be best, but more of the verbs. So after and verbs would go very well with that senses. When you use verbs, you engage the senses. And the third one would be the use of dialogues. Now, dialogues are very powerful and they are emotional. You see great movies, even in the midst of violence and destruction. A few words. Dialogues do not have to be kilometric long, but a few sentences or one sentence in a movie or in a scene where there is so much action is very powerful and very emotional. Like for example, we have these dialogue or this group of these words that have been used for the longest time. Like from great power comes great responsibility. There's one very powerful, intentional, definitive mantra. From great power comes great responsibility. Or in that movie, I love you 3,000 times. See, that's one dialogue that doesn't have to be kilometric long. It's just powerful statements. The use of dialogues bring the characters into the picture. And from the dialogue, from the conversation, you are able to gauge how your story would go. Now, transport that into your speech. How would you use dialogue? How can you insert the dialogue into your speech? For example, when we have a speech to inspire, okay, the dialogue there would come, for example, the importance of freedom. So you now go to describing freedom, what freedom, what are the elements of freedom that we must be able to exercise. Now, how do you use dialogue there? Maybe you could quote. In Martin Luther King said in his speech, that could be a form of a dialogue. I have a dream that one day the people of this country will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So you inject or infuse meaningful dialogue to be able to expand the value of your speech. Or the use of dialogue would be very simple also. For example, when you were a child, what were the most important things the first most important things your mom would tell you or your parents would tell you? They would tell me, never talk to strangers. So you don't talk to strangers. Never accept candies or anything from people you do not know. So these are dialogues that make the sentence really come to life rather than saying, when I was growing up, my mom would tell me so many things, so many things that I should not do. But when you say, when I was growing up, my mother would say, never talk to strangers. That's one. You see, never strangers. That knows how to receive candies or chocolates we do not know. When I was growing up, I was told not to accept anything from people. But when we say never accept candies or chocolates from people we do not know, that makes it more concrete. So in telling your story, engaging the senses, the use of dialogues, and then the use of verbs, these elements really make your story moving. We want a story that moves. We want a story that engages us. Gone are the days and they would say, once upon a time there lived in a faraway land. See, that's very jogging. But now we say something very present, something that is action oriented. Because we have a different kind of audience now. One, we have a very short attention span. See, that's why we say a speech is good for 5 to 7 minutes, because that is the attention span. Beyond that, we would not be that interested. Second, people are visual. They want to see what you are saying. They want to see images from the words that you use. And then the last one is they want a compelling message which comes in the form of a call to action. So these are the elements that you would incorporate in your story that you can transport into a speech, moving, engaging, and leaving a message or a lesson that we could all benefit from. So that is how to tell a story. Now, you would say, is that all? What do you mean? Of course, we go by the classic elements of how do you write your speech and transport, how do you write your story and transport into speech. We have the immortal IBC, right? We have the introduction. That's very basic and classic to form the structure of a speech crafted from a story. A story has an introduction, so a speech also has an introduction. So the introduction of the story converted into a speech is something. What do we say? An introduction must be arresting enough. It must be interesting enough to capture the immediate attention. They say that the first few seconds are crucial. If you are not able to capture the attention of your audience or your listeners in the first few seconds, then you have lost them. That is why in the beginning of a speech, we do not say, I'm sorry, you never apologize. I'm sorry, I was not able to. See? Or do not include non-essentials like when I was asked to deliver this speech, I was given these objectives. That's a very common pitfall of Toastmasters. I'm delivering speech project from Pathways, and the objective is you do not say that anymore as the speaker. The Toastmaster of the day or the evening should be the one to say that when you're introduced. So to make your opening very interesting, you go directly to the introduction. So, for example, you say, in your introduction that I never wanted to deliver speeches. See, you immediately connect. I never wanted to deliver speeches. As a person, I would rather stay at the back of the room rather than be on center stage. So they can go with you. Why don't you want to deliver speeches? Because as a person, you'd rather stay at the back rather than occupy the center stage. You see, rather than I was asked to deliver, that's very lame. But when you say, I do not like delivering speeches, as a person, I'd rather be at the back rather than on center stage. But then again, I realize that you live life not always at the background, but there are times when life pushes you to be on center stage. And being able to communicate is a very excellent way of practicing for life. So you see the twist in there. You don't have to have what Nike says, just do it. So just deliver the introduction. And then from the introduction now, you have one central idea. That's why we have the triad. The triad is no more than three ideas. The rule of three, right? The rule of three. No more than three examples. Because when you have more than three examples, you clutter your speech. So that's why we are also given things like triad. Words group in threes. See? Blood, sweat, and tears. Group of three. Or phrases, group of three. For thine is the power, the kingdom, and the glory, group of three. Then sentences, I came, I saw, I conquered. But of course, you cannot always have triads. But a triad is a very powerful tool that makes your speech eloquent. You see, you can have three short words unite that are related in succession: blood, sweat, and tears, or famine, death, famine, hunger, and death. Famine, hunger. No, let's famine first. Famine, hunger, and death. So those three. See, or you say in phrases, you would say, for example, um, people people work, people people work, people strive to earn better, and people reach their maximum. So we have three related activities. The triad must be related. It cannot be just anything. So people work, people earn money and become become better, so become sufficient. People reach their full potential. So it must be related. Now in sentences, the three sentences must also be related. Okay, so the rule of three, the triad, if you would try to understand this method more and use it in your speech, is a very is an example tool for eloquence. It makes your speech stand out. Why? Because the rule of three gives your speech a sense of completion, especially towards the end. It gives it a sense of finality. That's why, for example, literature is a very rich source of triads. I'd like to say, for example, Edgar Allan Poe, Annabel Lee is a perfect example of using triads. See, like, for the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of my beautiful Annabel Lee. And all the night tide, I lie down by her side, dreaming of my beautiful Annabel Lee. So it comes in threes. See, these are very powerful, eloquent tools that capture not only the mind, but it captures the feeling with intensity. Now, but of course, we cannot use poetry all the time. Poetry must be transported into prose. How do you now use the triad for the prose? Then it takes a lot of practice also, but if you get used to it, it will come naturally. See, so the use of the triad is one thing I've always asked people I share my knowledge with to use it in their speech, because it gives a sense of finality and it sinks deeper into their consciousness. So how do you write your story? Don't go far. So you have an introduction that's interesting. A body must not cover too many ideas. You have one central idea that you support with two minor ideas in the use of the triad. And then the conclusion. The conclusion must always have a call to action, because otherwise it hangs. No, it has to be completed. So you are given this much time. So what's in it for us, the reader, or what's in it for us as the listeners? So these are the things that we consider in writing your speech, crafted from a story. And the important part and the elements were write an interesting introduction. The introduction is the most difficult part, the opening statement. But once you have the opening statement, everything flows. And then the concluding statement must somehow be tied up to the opening statement. That's why we have the call to action. So there, use the senses, engage the senses. Not all senses may be engaged at any given time, but at least two or three, or at least two. Then you use dialogues, and after use the verbs, because the verbs give action and life to your speech, and then use the dialogue for a more meaningful connection to your audience. Dialogues are emotionally powerful. Even in the great movies, they are powerful. So, yes, my dear Cebu Pikpa Toastmasters, these are the elements I'd like to share with you. And if you would use